What's going on, everybody? Feder here from 3D Print SOS. Welcome back to the channel. In my last video, I showed you guys how to install JyersUI onto your Aquila 3D printers thanks to Alex's fork of the firmware. So if you have an Ender 3 V2 or an Aquila, you guys should know how to install it now. And in this video, we're gonna go over all the features and everything that you get for free and all the things that you can do with your printer with that firmware, including one of my favorite features, manual bed mesh leveling. I've used it for years on my other machines, so it's really nice to finally have it on this one. And essentially what it does is it creates a mesh over top of your bed with these points on the bed. And essentially if your bed isn't perfectly leveled or something is warped on your bed, this helps compensate for that and gives you a perfect level every single time. Another thing I've noticed over the years using this feature is if your printer is set up correctly and you have the right tension on your springs, or you eliminate the springs altogether, it can enable you not to level your bed nearly as much as normal, which is really nice. So really excited for that specifically, as well as all the other features like PID tuning, etc., etc. So let's get closer to the monitor and let me go ahead and show you everything that this firmware has to offer for free. All right, let's go. All right, so you've installed your firmware and now this is what your main screen looks like. So let's go ahead and go over that. Here you see your main 4 sections. We got print, prepare, control, and level. We'll go ahead and go through each one of them. But first, let's check out this screen because there's already a lot of information here. So you have your temperature on your hot end, your temperature on your bed. This right here is how fast your printer is going. The next one down is your extrusion rate. Then you have your cooling fan speed, and you have your Z offset height. It's really nice to be able to see all the information, this nice compact screen with little labels. It's very easy to see, which is great. Then on the bottom here, you see these zeros and question marks. These are the coordinates of where your hot end is at the moment, or your entire head is actually your hot end. But right now it doesn't know where it is because we haven't homed the printer. If the printer is ever homed, it will know exactly where it is, and this will go to 0, 0. And if you ever move the print head anywhere else, it'll show you exactly where it is here. So you can track things a little bit better. It's really useful for certain things like color changes, or if you're printing something in a specific spot. So that's really nice. So in the print menu, it will just pull all the files off your SD card. Here's what I have on mine, and then any folder will look like this. In my case, I have the stock files on here that the printer came with. So a very simple menu, nothing much here, but you can see how fast and responsive everything is, which is really nice. So then we have the prepare menu. Here, this will help you set things up. Let me tell you what I mean by that. So we have the move menu. So in the move menu, you have options by moving every single motor on the printer, including your extruder. Keep in mind that if you try to move your extruder and your temperature isn't high enough, it won't move. So just keep that in mind if you're testing. It's not broken, it's just not hot enough to move filament, so it's gonna stop you from doing so. But essentially you can click your dial and move things where you want it, and when you click, the printer moves. And there's this nice little feature on the bottom here called live movement. If you select it, it'll actually let you move those things just by moving the dial without actually setting it. The reason why I personally keep that off is I don't want anything accidentally crashing into itself. I actually like setting how far I want things to go and then being able to click it. But that's just my personal preference. Feel free to experiment with that. All right, next we have disable stepper. And disable stepper is really important because this will let you manually move all the axes on your printer, and you need to do that for the very initial manual bed leveling so that you don't have any crashing going on. So this is definitely a useful feature. All right, then we have homing. Homing is how you can home your entire printer. So when you click it, it's going to go through all of the end stops and put your printer at the home position. Now you can see those question marks on the bottom are gone because it knows where the print head is. And here you can individually home those things, and you can even set the home position. So if you wanted a smaller build plate, for example, some of those stick-ons that come here where you have a different piece of glass on there that's at a different position, you can set your home position right from here, which is nice. All right, then you have manual leveling. This isn't manual mesh leveling. This is just the standard one, and you need to do this at least once to be able to get your bed leveled before you start a mesh. But essentially what this will do is by clicking through each one of these things, the print head is going to move to those areas, and you can use your piece of paper and using these dials on the bottom of your print bed, you'll be able to level your printer initially without the mesh. And this is extremely useful to do. Because you don't have to move it manually by hand. It'll actually place the print head where you need it for these spots, which is really useful. All right, next is Z offset. Z offset isn't as useful when you don't have a automatic bed leveler set up. However, you might need this in some cases where if you did your bed leveling and everything is a little bit too low or everything is a little bit too high, you can move the whole Z axis up or down using this, and essentially it'll move it up or move it down. So for example, if you have everything perfectly leveled but it's not quite sticking, you can try going into Z offset and lowering it just a hair, just to see if that's enough to get things to stick, just as an example. All right, then a little bit lower we have the preheat menu. You can preheat your hot end and bed here. You can warm up the printer. You can warm it up for PLA, ABS, or PETG, and there's actually settings for you to set these parameters for these temperatures. You don't have to use them for these exactly. Like if you use TPU, for example, you can set your ABS one to your TPU temperatures, whatever you'd like. But essentially you have these three settings here for you that are very convenient for preheating and setting up your printer. Cooldown's pretty self-explanatory. Once things are hot, you can press this to cool it down. Essentially, it'll just turn off all the heating elements and it will just cool down over time. Change filament is very useful. I use this all the time. This is how I load in filament. Essentially, by clicking this, it'll heat up your hot end, and then it'll use your extruder to push filament into the hot end. Same with unload, and same with change. So very convenient feature right here, right through the menus in Prepare. All right, let's move on to control. In control, we have temperature. So here you can just click this and set the temperature right here, right there. So as you can see, the menus change here. I set it to 74, and now it's heating. Let's go ahead and put it back to 0. So individual control of everything. Here's the fans. Keep in mind that the highest you can go is 255. That would be 100% on the fan. So there you go. It turned on. All right, the next feature is actually really important, and one of the best features of this firmware is PID tuning. Essentially, PID tuning heats up an element and cools it down, and heats it up and cools it down in cycles. So here it's set to 5. Basically, it lets the printer learn how fast your hot end and how fast your bed will not only heat up, but cool down. And it can use this to better know when to heat and when to cool your bed to keep the temperatures more consistent. And it is an automatic setting that this goes through. You essentially select cycles. 5 seems to be good, but you can go to 10 or so if you want it to be a little bit more accurate. And essentially by clicking this, it will go ahead and go through the cycles of heating up and cooling down and learn, almost like the Nest thermostat does with temperatures inside of your home. It'll essentially help your printer be better at heating your hot end and your bed. So really, really great feature right here in the menu. Next is those temperature settings. So for warm up, you can set what you want your temperatures to be to warm up your printer. Same with PLA, ABS, and PETG. So you can set these temperatures so that when you go back to Prepare and you go all the way down here to Preheat, you can set these temperatures like I mentioned before. Very useful, very convenient, and really easy to do. All right, next is motion. Here we have home offsets. Once again, you can set your Y and X home offset right here in the menu. If you're changing things, or you're adding an ABL, or you change your cooling setup, you can use this to better home your printer and get it where it needs to be if you have adjusted things on your printer. If you're keeping things stock, try to stay away from that menu just in case you can accidentally mess something up. All right, then we have max speed. Now all of my settings you're going to see from now on are pretty much default. I haven't changed much here because the printer prints perfectly fine the way it is at the moment, so I'm not changing anything here. But essentially these are the speeds, the maximum speeds that your printer will allow it to go. And these are set perfectly fine for me. So I'm going to go ahead and go back. Your max acceleration. This is how much one of your axes can accelerate up to. And like I mentioned before, these are the stock figures here. You can adjust them as you please. Jerk is how fast your printer changes direction. And this has a direct connection to ringing and ghosting. And there's lots of videos on how to properly set this for your printer, but these stock figures I'm finding to be really, really good in my personal experience. This is where you can adjust your steps. So this will let you calibrate the steps on all of your axes so you can make extremely reliable and accurate prints. These are once again the default figures. And even the extruder seems to be perfectly fine at 93. It's not to the T accurate, but it's also not inaccurate. And I'm not printing really, really specific parts here. So I'm totally okay with this. But feel free to check out how to set your extruder E-steps to make them really, really accurate and perfect. And this will allow you to do that. All right, then we have the flow rate. And it's set to 100 right now, but some filaments flow at different rates. Here you can slow it down and speed it up, which is really nice. All right, so let's go to visual. So visual, you can turn this display off. One of the other nice features here is it lets you dim your screen. So here's 75%. Let's go back up to all the way. Really nice if you have a low dim room. Then if the screen is too bright for you, you can turn it down. This is just how you want your progress to look. I like to keep it in this format. Here you have UI color settings. Now this is interesting. You have a lot of control even over this aesthetic that you picked when you were installing this firmware. For example, my cursor here that you see me moving is white, and I set that here. If I go back to default, it goes back to red, which is how it came. And you have control. Oh, black's probably a bad choice. And you have control over quite a bit of this actually. For example, you have these lines, you have all of the text, you have some of the icons, some of the colors. Now you can't necessarily do all of it, like you can't do the full background to white and black and things like that, because there is still graphics on the display itself, and that's actually what you pick in the front. But you can, or not in the front, excuse me, when you're setting up this firmware. But you can actually change some of these things right from the menu, which is extremely convenient and nice. All right, let's move right along. All right, then we have the advanced menu. In the advanced, we have things like the LCD beeper, and what that does is make this beeping sound, which I instantly turn off because it is extremely loud. Actually, to be honest with you, I don't know what bed screw inset is. I've never touched it, but you know, it lets you modify a lot of your printer, which is just nice to see. Let's see, load length. So load length is how far your filament will be going in when you're loading filament. It's set to 310 millimeters by default. Same with unload length. It's at 300. This is that minimum extrusion temperature. So like I mentioned before, it's not, the printer isn't going to let you use your extruder unless things are hot enough, and this is where you set that temperature. So 180 should be good. However, actually I'm going to go ahead and set this to 200 just to be safe. There's no reason for me to accidentally use the extruder without having this being hot enough, so that's nice. Here you can turn on or turn off your filament sensor. I don't have one of those, so it's off for me. Run out distance, not exactly sure off the top of my head what this is, but someone please feel free to mention it down below. And we have power loss recovery. I keep this on, although what's interesting in my house, whenever the power blinks, it blinks a couple times, and I'm finding that power loss across all the machines that I own is good enough for one power off. So essentially, if you unplug your printer and then plug it back in, your printer will always ask if you want to continue printing. However, in my case, if it does it 3-4 times, you no longer get that option. So that's just something to keep in mind. All right, and then store settings. This is probably one of the most important parts of this whole firmware. If you set any of those figures to something else and you do not hit store, the next time you turn off your printer and turn it back on, you will lose those settings. Store is how you get your settings, how you make sure that everything that you have saved is restored. Set to defaults is self-explanatory, set back to the defaults, and info just shows you info. How many prints you've done, how many you've finished, how long you've printed, your bed size, the version, things of that nature. All right, let's keep going. All right, the next one is level. All right, so let's get to the leveling screen here. So one thing I do want to mention, that before you do any kind of mesh leveling, you need to level your bed normally. So you need to go to the other page, the prepare page, and go through the manual leveling, and go ahead and make sure you level your bed to make sure everything's nice and level. Use these knobs, go around, use the screen, and use a piece of paper that we'll also need for the mesh to go ahead and level your bed. I think before making the mesh, you need to do the best job you can leveling it normally, as if you didn't have mesh leveling. So now that we're here, let me go ahead and go through the menu, and then we'll actually go through and level the bed and make a mesh level. All right, so we have leveling active menu, and actually if someone would chime in and let me know what this actually does would be great. I've used both of these unclicked and clicked, and it seems to behave the same. So it'd be really nice if somebody let me know what that is, so I can better help somebody if they have questions. So the second thing here is create a new mesh, which is what we're going to do in a minute. We got manual tuning, so it's actually going to home if you click it. Let's give it a second to home. There it goes. And it's moving to a point. So here it's actually going to go through every single point in the mesh that I already have. It might not actually go here if you don't have a mesh already existent. But what this is doing is, when you had a mesh, you can go through all of the points in the mesh and actually micro-step them if something isn't right. Let's say one of the points is still a little bit too high, you didn't think you did a good job leveling it in that section. You can use this to move it up and down, set the Z offset for that specific spot, and here you can use next point to move to the next one. This is also very similar, if not exactly the same, how you actually make the mesh step by step. So this lets you go through and tune it, which is very nice. Let's go back here. This is the mesh viewer. Let me go ahead and show you what's in here. We have the actual mesh viewer. So this will only show up if you have your bed mesh already done. So here you can see the leveling of my bed. It looks like this corner is either too high or too low. I'm not exactly sure. And so you can see that it's not quite leveled, and this is the mesh that will help it be perfectly level every time, which is really nice. Actually, let's click this and see what this is. I'm not exactly sure. Viewer asymmetric. Not sure. Viewer show values. Let's see there. Okay, this is actually pretty useful. Okay, so there you go. That was actually really useful. So it looks like this is 0.24 higher, and this is 0.03 higher than 0.0. That's actually a nice and useful setting there. All right, let's go back. Leveling settings. Let's try this. So fade mesh within. So in here I have it set to 15. Stock, I believe it should be set to 10. If I recall correctly. I usually have it to 15, and what this does is, because you set this mesh, every single time you print, the Z-axis is constantly moving to compensate for that Z. So as your layers build up, this is saying that within 15 layers it needs to go back to being completely flat. 10 should be perfectly fine, but in my experience I like to keep it 15 in case you're printing something small, just to keep it as smooth as possible so that that transition is not something you'll be able to see. So that's just my personal opinion. You can keep that stock. All right, so to make a mesh, we need to heat up the printer. So I'm going to go to prepare. Let's go to preheat. Let's do, actually, it'll probably be easier to do, go to control, go to temperature, let's go bed, and we are going to get this hot to about 70. So let's give it a second to warm up. As you can see right down here, the bed is warming. So let's give it a minute. I'll speed this part up and I'll see you in a second. All right, so here we go. Looks like our bed is at 70 degrees, which is what we want. So to make a new mesh, what we're going to do is go to create new mesh, and it is going to home. I'm going to sneak my little piece of paper under here real quick while it is homing, just so I don't have to press it in there. There you go. So here are the options that you're getting. You get next point, which if this is perfect, which it's not, I can't pull this. this is what you'll click. We have your Z position. You can actually click here and move things up manually like so. Here's 0.30 for example, which is still a little bit too tight. Let's go 0.4. There we go. Now I can move it a bit, but then I can do micro step up, and this is actually what I will do to make it perfect. So I'm clicking it just a couple times. I want to feel pressure on the paper, just like normally leveling it, but not too loose. Let's see, somewhere around 41-ish was pretty good. Let's do 43. So I think this is good for this point, so I'm going to go ahead and hit next point, and now the printer will move to the next point. And looks like 43 was good for there, so let's just go ahead and put that there. And it's a little bit too high for this one, so let's move it down. Looks like this one should be much lower. Here we go, we're getting some tension now. So this is the process that you go through. You're gonna micro step it up and down until you think that the tension on the paper is good. Let's see, just a little bit lower, somewhere here. There we go, that's good. Hit next point. And the number of points depends on the firmware that you picked. I like to do 3x3 in my personal opinion for these small beds. That's perfectly fine. I've never had issues with a 3x3 grid. If you do a higher grid like a 5x5, this will take a little bit longer, but you will have a much more accurate mesh, which is not a bad thing. So if you're a patient person, go ahead and do that. Another thing, that if you do have an automatic bed leveler, this process is a little bit different, but it's also fully automated. So I know that's why a lot of people like that. And I'll definitely be sure to check that out in the future and feature it on the channel. All right, so I'm just going to keep going through. Every time I think that I have it correctly, I'm hitting next and letting it move. And as you can see, the points are all over the place, and you know that's why mesh leveling is so great, because you get to fine tune it and really negate any kind of imperfections in the bed. All right, this one's really tight. This one's probably going to be in the 40s, kind of like that front corner was. Oh, there we go. This is actually pretty good. There we go. Let's go 2 down. All right, next point. So we're on the final 3 at this point. This looks like my left side's a little bit high. And if you're not happy with how this is going and you want to make it even more perfect, you can always re-level your bed and then redo this just to get everything a little bit neater, a little bit tighter, and that's definitely not a bad thing to do. Ooh, nice. That's perfect right there. And the last point. A little bit lower here. There we go. I'm happy with that. All right, and here we go, save mesh. So there you go. Now this mesh is saved, so we can actually go ahead and view it. There we go. And it's actually similar to what I had before, but a little bit more accurate than last time, which is nice. So the final step, and this is probably one of the most important steps, is to actually go back to control and make sure that you hit store settings and wait for this message to pop up that says success. If you don't, it's very likely that a lot of these settings are not going to save, and you will have to redo this again. So there you go. That's how you have a perfectly leveled bed and how you set up a mesh in this firmware, which is definitely one of my favorite features. The next thing I would recommend you do if this is the first time setting this up is go ahead and do your PID tuning on both the hot end and the hot bed. It'll help you just make everything a little bit more accurate in terms of how the temperature is held, so on and so forth. And there's actually one more step for your mesh. In order for the firmware to pull up your mesh every single time and make it reliable, in your slicer you will have to add a G-code to pull up your mesh every single time. So if you go down in the description, you can copy and paste this little piece of G-code and go ahead and paste that into your Start Gcode on whichever slicer you use for this printer, and that will, like I said, before every print it will pull up this mesh and make sure that it uses it. Alright, that's it for this, guys, and now you should have a perfectly leveled bed, which is awesome. Alright, so that is JyersUI for the Ender 3 V2, or in our case, the Alex's fork of the firmware for the Aquila 3D printer by Voxelab. So as you can see, it really opens up the door to these machines. You get to calibrate it to every possible extent. All the features are available to you. It is completely free and open source. So it's very hard to complain about. It really is an absolute powerhouse when you have this much control, this much customizability. You can even change the colors of the cursor. It just the possibilities are endless. So if you've learned how to use your printer and you're excited about modifying it or changing things, or even just the ability to calibrate every single part of it, change your E-steps, things of that nature, customize where your home is, this is where it's at. I highly recommend you guys getting this firmware. If you guys know those two settings I didn't know about, if you know what they do, please comment down below so that not only I can learn, but I can help others if they have questions for me about it. I'd really appreciate the help for that. Also worth mentioning, I'm trying out a new filament by 3D Max. This one is lime green and neon green, and I have a few others to go through. It looks like they have a massive selection. And the price is just almost too good to be true. So I'm really excited to checking it out and giving it a test. Most of my future prints from today will be using this filament just to get through and see what it's all about. Right now, just the color selection alone is wild, and they ship really fast if you're in the United States. So definitely check out 3D Max filaments. But yeah, I just went ahead and selected a Benchy, hit print, and it's going great. The mesh on the bed helps us level perfectly every single time, and I'm just excited to use the machine. The firmware definitely helps it become just a whole nother level of a printer. Why companies don't give you this access, I'm not exactly sure. I think something, when I first initially saw the Aquila interface, I was really excited about how simple and straightforward it is. I do remember liking the fact that it didn't have every feature. It kind of stripped it down to the bare minimum. So that's why I say if you're ready for it, because it can be overwhelming. There is a lot of settings and a lot of things you can accidentally mess up. So if you've learned your way through the stock firmware, or even this at stock settings, and you're ready, all of it is available for you here. So it's just it's nice to be able to have this kind of community and this kind of level of free firmware available for these machines. It's really exciting. So there you go, guys. That's all from me. If you know somebody who would appreciate seeing this video, send them a link and give me a thumbs up. That would really help this channel. Also, I'm going to include a link to the Discord in the description below. Share your prints. I just started a resin section there in case you want to get into resin printing or troubleshoot your resin printer or talk about it there. We have an active community there, people helping each other out. So very nice. If you have any questions for me or can help me out with the two settings I didn't know on the firmware, let me know in the comments below. I would appreciate it because it'll help me out and help others out. And as always, guys, I'll see you down in the comments. Later.